What happens when the guardians of your neighborhood become its deadliest enemies? When trust turns to poison, literally, and revenge becomes the only justice left? When my HOA poisoned my sister's water and laughed in my face about it, I spent my life savings to secretly buy the neighborhood's water rights and turned off their taps until they begged for mercy. What would you do if the people meant to protect your community tried to destroy your family instead? I spotted the white envelope with the bright red violation stamp before I even got out of my car. Another notice from the Homeowners Association that made 3 this week. I grabbed it and stomped inside, tossing my keys on the counter. "Let me guess," my sister Emma called from the kitchen. Karen struck again. I tore open the envelope. "Apparently, your garden gnomes are unsightly lawn decorations that diminish neighborhood aesthetic value." Emma had moved in next door just 2 months ago after her divorce. She'd been so happy to find a house close to me, but our HOA president, Karen Reynolds, was making her life miserable. "Those gnomes were Mom's," Emma said quietly, her hands shaking slightly as she poured water from the tap. "They are the only things I have left of her," I noticed Emma muse as she sipped her water. "Everything okay?" "This water tastes weird, kind of metallic. I've been getting stomach aches, too." She sat down the glass with a frown. "Maybe I should take a sample to get tested," I suggested. Emma shook her head. "I'm probably just stressed from all these HOA notices. Did you know Karen took pictures of my recycling bin yesterday because it was visible from the street?" I'd lived in Riverside Heights for 5 years before Emma moved in, and I'd mostly kept my head down around Karen and her clipboard wielding minions on the HOA board. But watching my sister being harassed was making my blood boil. "Let's go talk to her," I said suddenly, "face to face. No more hiding behind these stupid notices." 20 minutes later, we stood on Karen's perfectly manicured lawn with its geometric shrubs and spotless white gravel borders. Her house was twice the size of our modest homes, with columns framing the entrance like some kind of suburban palace. Karen answered the door in tennis whites, a pearl necklace gleaming against her tan skin. Her smile vanished when she saw us. "We need to discuss these constant violations," I said, holding up the day's notice. Karen's husband, Tom, appeared behind her, a tall man with a permanent scowl. "Is there a problem here?" "No problem at all," Karen said smoothly. "Just some neighbors who don't understand that rules exist for a reason." She turned to Emma. "Those gnomes violate Section 7, Paragraph 3 of our community guidelines. Remove them by tomorrow or face a $100 fine." Emma's voice trembled. "They were my mother's." "Not my concern," Karen cut her off. "And while we're at it, your hedges are 2 in above regulation height, and your mailbox paint doesn't match the approved color palette." I felt my temper rising. "This is harassment, Karen. You've sent my sister 15 violation notices in 6 weeks." Karen's eyes narrowed. "If following rules is too difficult, perhaps Riverside Heights isn't the right community for your family." The way she said family made it sound like an insult. As we turned to leave, Tom called after us. "We're doing waterline inspections tomorrow. Make sure your access points are clear." Something about his tone made the hair on my neck stand up. That night, I heard Emma getting sick in the bathroom again. "I think it's the water," she whispered, her face pale and drawn. "Every time I drink it, I get these cramps." I filled a bottle from her tap and one from mine to compare. Hers definitely smelled different, a faint chemical odor I couldn't place. The next day, I watched from my window as the inspection team arrived, which was just Tom and 2 guys wearing shirts with the logo of Reynolds Construction. Karen's husband owned the company that handled most of the neighborhood maintenance contracts, a fact that never seemed to bother the HOA board. What struck me as odd was that they only stopped at certain houses. Emma's, the Patels, who had complained about last month's dues increase, and old Mr. Garcia, who had spoken against Karen at the last community meeting. Through my binoculars, I could see Tom handling something near Emma's external water connection point. but from my angle I couldn't tell what he was doing. The whole inspection took less than 5 minutes at each house. That evening, Emma called me in a panic. "Something's really wrong," she gasped. "The stomach pain is unbearable." I rushed next door to find her curled up on the bathroom floor. Without hesitation, I scooped her up and drove straight to the emergency room, my heart pounding with fear. The emergency room was crowded, but Emma's symptoms got the doctor's attention quickly. After examining her and running blood tests, Dr. Martinez pulled me aside, her expression grave. "Your sister is showing signs of metal poisoning," she said quietly. "We're still determining exactly what type, but her symptoms are consistent with copper sulfate exposure. Has she been around any pesticides or pool chemicals?" My mind raced back to Tom and his water inspection crew. Could it be in her water supply? Absolutely. We see this sometimes with corroded pipes or contamination. "I'd recommend testing her home water immediately," the doctor advised, writing orders for more tests. "In the meantime, she'll need to stay here for treatment and hydration." As I sat next to Emma's hospital bed, watching fluids drip into her arm, a terrible suspicion took root in my mind. I remembered Karen's smug face, Tom's mysterious work at the water connection, and how they only visited the homes of people who had crossed the HOA. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Karen. "Heard about Emma. So sorry. Hope she'll feel better soon so she can address those violations. Remember, fines double after 10 days. I stared at the message, fury building inside me. Right then, I made a silent promise to my sleeping sister. If someone had poisoned her water, I would find out who did it and why. And if Karen and her hoe thugs were responsible, I would make them pay, not with angry words or petty complaints, but by taking away the very power they abused. What I didn't know then was just how deep the corruption ran in Riverside Heights, or that uncovering the truth would put both Emma and me in the crosshairs of people willing to do far worse than poison a water line. The lab technician's face told me everything before he even spoke. "Miss, these water samples contain dangerous levels of copper sulfate. It's not something that happens by accident in residential pipes." My heart sank as I thanked him and rushed to my car. Emma had been in the hospital for 3 days now. The doctors kept saying they'd never seen symptoms quite like hers before. Now I knew why. I called my friend Mark, who works for the city water department. Copper sulfate? That's used to kill tree roots in pipes and algae in ponds. Nobody should drink that stuff. It would need to be deliberately added to your system. It doesn't just appear. That night I couldn't sleep. Rain pattered against my window as questions swirled in my mind. Who would want to hurt Emma? She'd only lived here 6 months. The only trouble she'd had was with the HOA about her garden gnomes and the bright blue mailbox she installed. Karen Reynolds, our HOA president, had specifically targeted Emma with violation notices weekly since she moved in. But poisoning someone over lawn decorations, that seemed extreme even for Karen. I installed security cameras the next day, 2 visible ones by the front door and 3 hidden ones covering the sides of Emma's house and her water meter. The salesman tried to sell me a fancy system, but I just needed something basic that would record to my phone. "You expecting trouble?" he asked while setting them up. "Just being careful," I replied, not wanting word to spread around the neighborhood. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed at 2:17 a.m. Motion detection, half asleep. I almost ignored it. But something made me look. A dark figure with a flashlight was crouching near Emma's water filtration system by the side of her house. I jumped out of bed, threw on shoes, and ran across my lawn toward Emma's house. The figure stood up quickly, startled by my shouts. The beam of their flashlight hit my face, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, I saw Tom Reynolds, Karen's husband, holding a plastic jug. "What are you doing to my sister's water?" I yelled. He dropped the container and ran toward his black SUV parked down the street. I couldn't catch him, but I didn't need to. I had him on camera. I carefully picked up the jug he dropped using a plastic bag and sealed it inside a clean bucket. The next morning, I took the container to the same lab that had tested Emma's water. The technician confirmed it contained concentrated copper sulfate solution, the kind used for killing algae in ponds. The security footage clearly showed Tom pouring it into the filter housing that fed directly into Emma's house. I took everything to the police station, certain they'd arrest Tom immediately. Officer Jenkins watched the video twice. This is concerning, but we can't prove intent. He could claim he was treating algae in the pipes as a courtesy at 2 ABBFT. Without telling anyone. My voice rose with each question. I understand you're upset, but this is a civil matter between neighbors. Document everything and consider getting a lawyer. He handed me back my phone with the footage. I left the station feeling defeated but determined. If the police wouldn't help, I needed to confront Karen and Tom directly. I found Karen at the community center planning the neighborhood's summer picnic with her inner circle of HOA loyalists. Her perfect blonde hair bounced as she laughed with her friends. "Karen, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside me. She looked up annoyed at the interruption. "I'm busy. If this is about your sister's violations, she can submit an appeal form like everyone else. This is about your husband poisoning my sister's water supply." The room went silent. 5 women stared at me with shocked expressions. Karen's face hardened into a mask of controlled rage. "That's a serious accusation. You should be careful about spreading lies." She stood up, smoothing her expensive dress. "Ladies, excuse us." She led me to a private corner, her fake smile dropping instantly. "What exactly are you implying?" I showed her the video of Tom at Emma's water system. Karen watched without flinching, then laughed in my face. Tom was checking for leaks as part of the HOA's routine maintenance. Your sister's water problems are her own fault. If she followed HOA guidelines instead of fighting us on everything, maybe unfortunate accidents wouldn't happen. Accidents? Emma is in the hospital. The police have the evidence. Karen's eyes narrowed. If the police thought there was anything to this, they'd have arrested Tom. They didn't, did they? Because there's nothing to arrest him for. That's when I remembered something important. Karen owned Reynolds Construction, the company that had recently inspected our neighborhood's water infrastructure. The same company that had submitted a proposal to the HOA board for water system upgrades that would cost each homeowner an additional $5,000 in special assessments. This is about money, isn't it? Your company gets the contract if everyone agrees to the water system upgrades, I said, the pieces clicking together. Karen's smile turned cold. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I've been running this neighborhood for 15 years. People who cross me don't last long here. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. Drop this nonsense or you'll regret it. Nobody will believe you anyway. She turned back toward her friends. We're done here. As I walked home, neighbors watched from their windows but quickly disappeared when I looked their way. People were afraid of Karen. I realized why nobody had ever stood up to her before. That evening, I received an email from the HOA board. Emma was being fined $250 per day for contaminating community water infrastructure and would be responsible for all necessary repairs. They had turned her into the villain. I printed the security footage photos and water test results and slid them under the doors of every house in the neighborhood, with a note explaining what happened. By morning, Karen had sent an HO email claiming I was mentally unstable and spreading dangerous misinformation. 3 neighbors who initially called offering support suddenly wouldn't answer my calls. Something had scared them off. I was alone in this fight with Emma still in the hospital getting worse instead of better. The doctors couldn't understand why her symptoms weren't improving despite treatment. That night, I heard glass breaking outside. I ran to my window and saw 3 teenage boys running away from my car. All the windows were smashed, and a note was stuck under the windshield wiper. Drop it, or things will get worse. I realized I needed a different approach. Fighting Karen directly wasn't working. I needed to find her weakness, something that would give me leverage. What could make someone like Karen Reynolds finally face consequences for her actions? I stayed up all night researching our neighborhood's history, property records, and water rights. That's when I discovered something that made my heart race. Our subdivision's water rights weren't owned by the city like I'd assumed. They were privately held by a trust that was currently selling shares. Who would control the water would come down to who owned the most shares. Could I actually beat Karen at her own game? As light broke over the horizon, I made a decision that would either save my sister or cost me everything I had. My hands shook as I walked into the HOA meeting room. I clutched a blue folder stuffed with all the evidence, the scary lab results showing poison in Emma's water, the doctor's letter about her illness, and the videos from my security cameras showing Tom Reynolds sneaking around my sister's house at night. "I call this meeting to order," Karen announced, banging her fancy wooden hammer on the table. She wore a bright red blazer that made her look like she was trying to be important. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me. "I see we have a special guest today." 20 neighbors sat in plastic chairs. Most avoiding my eyes, I recognized Mr. Jenkins, who brought us cookies when Emma first moved in, and Mrs. Patel, whose kids played with Emma's cat when it escaped. They all looked uncomfortable. "I have proof that someone poisoned my sister's water," I said, my voice louder than I expected in the quiet room. I opened my folder and started laying out papers. Emma's blood tests show copper sulfate poisoning. The same chemical was found in her home water supply, but nowhere else on our street. Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's quite an accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact." I pressed play on my phone. The security video showed Tom Reynolds at 213 a.m. pouring something into Emma's water filtration system. The room got so quiet I could hear someone's stomach growl. I waited for gasps or angry shouts. Instead, Karen laughed. "That could be anyone. And it could be pool treatment chemicals he was disposing of improperly. Naughty Tom littering." She turned to the board members. "Next on our agenda." "That's it." I stepped forward. "My sister almost died." Board member Walter Higgins cleared his throat. "Without clear proof of intent, this is really a police matter. The police said it's a civil issue, and to bring it to the HOA." My cheeks burned hot. Karen's eyes flashed with something mean. "Then perhaps you should hire a lawyer. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have actual HOA business to discuss." Mrs. Patel raised her hand timidly. "Shouldn't we at least investigate if someone is tampering with water?" "Motion denied," Karen snapped. "We don't have the budget for wild goose chases." I looked around the room. Searching for allies, most neighbors stared at their shoes. Mr. Jenkins mouthed, "I'm sorry," before looking away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain pounded against my windows as I paced my kitchen. Emma was finally back home, but still weak, jumping at every sound. When my phone buzzed with a text from my friend Zach at the newspaper, I almost dropped it. "Found something weird in county records? Call me." Zach was waiting outside the coffee shop when I arrived the next morning. His laptop already open, dark circles under his eyes told me he'd been up all night. So I was digging into Reynolds Construction, Karen's husband's company," he said between sips of his triple-shot espresso. "They've done all the water maintenance in your neighborhood for the past 5 years." "That's a conflict of interest," I said. "Gets better. Look at this." He turned his screen toward me. On it was a property map with strange lines cutting through our neighborhood. "Your subdivision's water doesn't come from the city supply. It's on a private system owned by something called Riverside Heights Water, LLC. My brain felt foggy trying to understand. "What does that mean?" "It means," Zach said, lowering his voice, "that your HOA doesn't just control your fence height and lawn ornaments. They control your actual water supply, and guess who owns 30% of Riverside Heights water?" "Karen and Tom," I whispered, pieces clicking together. "Bingo. But here's the interesting part." He pulled up another document. The trust that owns the majority stake is looking to sell. The owner died last month and his kids want cash, not water rights. For the first time in days, hope flickered inside me. How much? The number Zach showed me made my stomach drop. My teaching salary wouldn't cover a tenth of it. But as I walked to my car, an idea took shape. My house had good equity, and my parents had left me some money I'd been saving for retirement. When I got home, my driveway was blocked by a police car. Officer Grant stood next to my car, which now had shattered windows and slashed tires. "Any enemies, ma'am?" he asked, writing in his little notebook. I thought about Karen's smirk in the meeting. "Just one, found this under the windshield." He handed me a note in a plastic bag. "Drop it, or things will get worse." That night, Emma and I packed her things. She'd stay with me until we figured things out as we carried boxes to my car. Karen and 3 board members watched from across the street. "Good riddance," Karen called out. "Troublemakers don't last long here." "I'm not going anywhere," Emma said. Her voice still weak, Karen's laugh was sharp as glass. "We'll see about that. Board's voting on a special assessment for your property tomorrow. Seems your landscaping needs extensive work to meet community standards." That night, I made the biggest decision of my life. I called my bank, my financial advisor, and finally the number on the trust document Zach had found. "I'd like to discuss purchasing the water rights to Riverside Heights," I said, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the response. 3 days later, I sat in a lawyer's office signing papers that would drain my savings account and put me in debt for years. The lawyer looked concerned. "Are you sure about this? It's a lot of money for some pipes and pumping equipment." I thought of Emma's pale face in the hospital bed, Karen's laughter at the meeting, the smashed windows of my car, the neighbors who turned away. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. Signing the final document, as I walked out with the deed, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Emergency HOA meeting just announced for tonight. Karen saying she's found a way to force me out for good." I texted back, "Don't worry, I'll be there. And this time, I'm ready." I clutched the papers in my hand, a strange calm settling over me. Karen thought she held all the power in our neighborhood. By tonight, she'd learn how wrong she was. But first, I needed to make one stop at the water treatment facility that now officially belonged to me. My hands shook as I signed the final papers. The bank manager slid them into a folder, looking at me with concern. "Are you sure about this, miss? That's your entire savings plus a second mortgage." I nodded firmly, more sure than I've ever been about anything. Outside the bank, I called Emma from my car. My sister answered weakly, her voice still raspy from the hospital stay. "How are you feeling today?" I asked, trying to hide my excitement. "Better, I think. The new medication is helping. When can I go home?" I gripped the steering wheel. "Not yet. Stay at my place until we're sure it's safe." I couldn't tell her about my plan yet. If it didn't work, the disappointment would crush her. The manila folder on my passenger seat contains something Karen Reynolds never expected. Proof that I now owned controlling interest in Riverside Heights Water LLC. 3 sleepless nights researching property records had revealed an incredible fact. Our subdivision's water supply wasn't owned by the county. It was privately held by a trust that was selling shares due to the owner's death. Karen, in her arrogance, had never bothered to learn who actually controlled the neighborhood's most precious resource. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor Mike. "Karen at your sister's house again with clipboard taking pictures?" I raced home to find Karen in Emma's front yard, her perfectly highlighted blonde hair gleaming in the sun as she photographed the property. 2 HOA board members, Diane and Peter, flanked her like bodyguards. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. Karen spun around, her red lips curling into a cruel smile. "Oh, look, it's the other troublemaker. We're documenting the continued violations, dead plants, unkempt lawn. That's 3 fines this week. My sister is in the hospital because someone poisoned her water. I said loudly enough for the neighbors watering their lawns to hear. Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. Accusations without proof could be considered defamation. Be careful. Like the rumors you're spreading that Emma's sickness is drug-related. Her eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected me to know about that. Your sister has received ample warnings about her violations, Diane chimed in. Rules exist for everyone's benefit. I watched them leave. Karen's expensive heels clicking on the sidewalk. The folder in my car felt heavier now, more significant. That evening, Emma's doctor called with worse news. The poison had affected her kidneys. She might need dialysis if she didn't improve. I sat on my kitchen floor and cried until my throat hurt. By morning, my sadness had hardened into determination. I drove to the county recorder's office to officially register my ownership stake in the water company. The clerk stamped the documents, making it official. Congratulations, he said without looking up. You now own water. The next 3 days passed in a blur of harassment. Karen seemed to sense something had changed. Though she couldn't figure out what, she escalated her campaign against us. My mailbox overflowed with violation notices. Anonymous calls came at all hours. Someone splashed red paint on my driveway. We need to move, Emma suggested from her bed in my spare room. Her face was still pale, her once vibrant eyes now dull with pain and fear. I can't fight anymore. Just trust me, I said, squeezing her hand. We're not running away. On Thursday, an envelope arrived containing a notice of lien against Emma's property for unpaid HOA fines. That same day, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting for Saturday morning to discuss problem residents undermining community standards. Mike texted me the details. They're going to try to force Emma to sell. Karen's husband's construction company is already lined up to buy it cheap. Saturday morning arrived bright and hot. I dressed carefully. Professional but not flashy. The community center buzzed with whispers as I walked in alone. Karen stood at the podium looking triumphant. Her husband Tom beside her with architectural plans rolled under his arm. We're addressing serious concerns about certain properties bringing down our community values, Karen began, her gaze fixed on me. Additionally, we need to discuss water infrastructure upgrades. Tom's company has provided an excellent bid. I sat quietly, letting her talk. She outlined plans for increased HOA fees to fund essential water system improvements and introduced a bylaw amendment allowing for expedited eviction of homeowners with multiple violations. The room temperature seemed to rise as neighbors shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke against her. And finally, water rates will increase by 35% next quarter to cover these necessary improvements. Karen finished with a satisfied smile. All in favor? Several hands started to rise when I stood up. Before we vote, I said calmly, walking toward the front, I think there's something everyone should know. Karen's eyes narrowed. This isn't an open forum. You can submit comments in writing. I ignored her. Pulling documents from my bag, 3 days ago, I purchased controlling interest in Riverside Heights Water, LLC. The room fell silent. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. That's impossible, Tom sputtered, his face weening. The water system is county property. I handed copies of my ownership papers to the nearest neighbors. Actually, it's privately owned, and now I control 51% of it. Karen lunged for the papers, but people were already passing them around, eyes widening. You can't do this, she screamed, her composed facade cracking completely. I already did, I replied, and effective immediately. I'm conducting a mandatory safety inspection that requires shutting off water to certain properties for testing. Murmurs spread through the room as I continued, starting with every board member who voted against investigating the contamination of my sister's water. Karen grabbed the microphone. This is illegal, Tom. Call the lawyer. But the damage was done. People were standing now, asking questions all at once. Who owned their water? Why was Emma sick? What contamination? As the meeting dissolved into chaos, I walked to the door, turning back for one final statement. Water service will resume when a full investigation into the copper sulfate poisoning is complete. Until then, I suggest board members stock up on bottled water. It's going to be a very hot weekend. I stepped outside into the sunshine, my phone already buzzing with messages from neighbors suddenly eager to talk. For the first time since Emma got sick, I felt something like hope. The real fight was just beginning. The meeting room buzzed with angry voices as Karen pointed at a photo of my sister's house on the big screen. This troublemaker has ignored 3 notices about her ugly lawn decorations, and now she's spreading lies about our water system to avoid paying her fines. People nodded and whispered. I gripped my folder of papers so tight my knuckles turned white. Karen smoothed her perfect blonde bob and smiled. That fake smile I'd seen 1,000 times. I move that we increase enforcement measures and water rates by 15% to fund necessary community improvements. She winked at her husband, Tom, whose construction company would surely get the contract. I stood up slowly. The room went quiet as I walked to the front, my heart pounding like a drum. Before we vote, I said, holding up my documents, you should know something important. I now control 51% of Riverside Heights Water, LLC. The stunned silence felt like a physical thing. Karen's smile froze, then melted away like ice in summer. That's impossible, she sputtered, her face turning red. Those rights aren't for sale to just anyone. I smiled and slid the notarized papers across the table. They were to someone with enough cash and the right lawyer. Effective immediately. I'm conducting an urgent safety inspection that requires shutting off water to certain properties. Tom jumped to his feet. You can't do that. We have contracts. Actually, I can. Starting with every board member who voted against investigating the contamination of my sister's water. I pulled out a printed list. For safety reasons, of course. Karen lunged toward me, knocking over her chair. You little snake. I'll sue you into the ground. 2 neighbors had to hold her back as she thrashed and screamed about lawyers and connections. Bob Wilson, a retired judge who lived 3 doors down, picked up my papers and examined them carefully. These appear legitimate, he said quietly. The room erupted into chaos. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Emma. My laptop opened to the water company's control system. With a few clicks, I shut off the supply to 6 houses. Karen and Tom's mansion, plus the 4 board members who had backed them most strongly. Are you sure about this? Emma asked, her face still pale from her illness. They'll come after you hard. Let them, I said, pushing a glass of clean filtered water toward her. I've already sent evidence packages to 3 news stations and the county prosecutor. The next morning, my phone exploded with text messages and calls. I ignored them all and drove Emma to her doctor's appointment. When we returned, Karen stood in my driveway with 2 police officers. That's her! Karen shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. She's illegally cut off our water. Arrest her, Officer Davis, who had taken my report about Emma's poisoning weeks earlier, looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, we checked with the county. She does appear to have legal authority over the water rights. This is a civil matter. Karen's perfect makeup couldn't hide her fury. Do you know who my husband plays golf with? Your captain will hear about this. The officers left and Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Turn our water back on or you'll regret it. Nobody crosses me in my own neighborhood. I stood my ground like my sister regretted drinking poisoned water. The safety inspection continues until the board agrees to an independent investigation of the contamination. By day 2, the lawns of the affected houses began to wilt under the hot sun. Karen and her allies couldn't shower, flush toilets, or cook. They had to buy bottled water and check into hotels. Meanwhile, I noticed something interesting. Neighbors who had always avoided me were now nodding hello. Some even stopped to chat. Melissa from across the street brought over homemade cookies. We all knew something was wrong, she admitted shamefully. But Karen has gotten people fired, spread rumors, even influenced bank loans. Nobody wanted to be her next target. And now? I asked. Now, people see she's not untouchable. On day 3, a local news van parked at the entrance to our subdivision. Anonymous sources provided us with concerning evidence of potential water contamination in the Riverside Heights community. The reporter announced on the evening broadcast. The camera zoomed in on documents showing Karen's husband's company had dumped chemical waste near our water source and falsified inspection reports. That night, someone smashed my car windows again. This time, my security cameras caught Tom doing it, screaming about payback the whole time. The next morning, I found 50 neighbors standing on my lawn. I tensed, preparing for confrontation. But Bob, the retired judge, stepped forward. "We've called an emergency board meeting," he said. "The majority of homeowners demand new leadership and a full investigation." He handed me a petition with signatures from over 70% of the neighborhood. At the crowded meeting that afternoon, Karen and Tom didn't show up. The new temporary board voted unanimously to investigate the water contamination, replace all potentially affected pipes, and create a system of checks and balances for HOA leadership. "And what about water service to the suspended board members?" someone asked. All eyes turned to me. I thought about Emma's hospital bed, about Karen's threats, about years of watching neighbors bullied by HOA power trips. Water is restored when they sign legally binding statements admitting knowledge of the contamination, I said, and when they agree to pay for all medical expenses my sister incurred. By sunset, 5 of the 6 had signed. Only Karen and Tom held out their darkened house, standing like an island of defiance. As I was about to go to bed, my doorbell rang. It was Karen alone, her perfect appearance now disheveled, holding a stack of papers. "Here's your confession," she said, thrusting them at me. "Now turn on our water." I flipped through the pages. These admit nothing. They just blame mysterious vandals and bad luck. Karen's mask finally cracked completely. Tears streaked her makeup as she hissed, "What more do you want from me? You've won. I want the truth for once." "Fine. Tom added the copper sulfate to scare your sister into moving. We didn't think it would make her that sick. It was just supposed to be a warning." Her eyes narrowed. "But if you think this is over, you're dead wrong. My husband knows people you don't want to meet." I took out my phone and pressed stop on the recording app. Karen's face went white. "Was that a threat, Karen?" Because the prosecutor might find this conversation very interesting when combined with the other evidence. She stumbled backward off my porch, her world crumbling around her. I watched her walk away, wondering if I'd gone too far or not far enough. Either way, tomorrow would bring new battles. But would it also bring justice for my sister? The day after I revealed my ownership of the water rights, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 27 missed calls from Karen, 15 from other board members, and dozens of texts from neighbors suddenly wanting to chat. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat on my porch with Emma, drinking clean, filtered water and watching the chaos unfold across our once quiet street. "Is it wrong that I'm enjoying this?" Emma asked, her face still pale from weeks of poisoning, but her eyes bright with something new. "Justice." "Not at all," I replied, as we watched Tom Reynolds frantically loading cases of bottled water into their luxury SUV. "They're just getting a tiny taste of what they put you through." News vans appeared before noon. I'd sent anonymous tips with copies of my evidence to 3 different stations. The headlines spread fast. HOA president's company accused of poisoning homeowners' water. Karen tried to block the cameras, screaming about trespassing and threatening lawsuits, which only made for better footage. My neighbor Diane timidly approached our porch carrying a basket of muffins. She'd stayed silent at every HOA meeting while Emma was being harassed. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, not quite meeting our eyes. We all suspected something wasn't right with Karen, but we were scared. My husband's on the transplant list, and Karen's brother works at the hospital. We couldn't risk making enemies. Her words stung with truth. Karen had weaponized fear, turning neighbors against each other. I accepted Diane's muffins, but not her excuses. Fear makes sense, I told her. But next time, remember that silence enables bullies. It only takes one person to break that silence. By day 2, without water, cracks formed in Karen's support system. Board member Jeff Miller knocked on my door, sweating and desperate. Look, I've got 3 kids and no water. Whatever Karen did, my family shouldn't suffer. I handed him a document. Sign the statement about what you witnessed at board meetings regarding Emma's complaints. Then we'll talk about restoring your water. One by one, they came forward. Board members, committee heads, neighbors who'd looked the other way. Each signed sworn statements detailing Karen's abuse of power, threats, and conflicts of interest. I gathered 17 affidavits by sunset. On day 3, I hired professional water testers to sample every house in the neighborhood. They found traces of copper sulfate in 5 other homes, all belonging to residents who had previously filed complaints against the HOA. The pattern was unmistakable and damning. When the police knocked on my door, I wasn't surprised. Karen had filed charges claiming I was endangering public health by shutting off water. The officers, however, seemed more interested in the evidence I'd collected. "Ma'am, this looks like a case of deliberate contamination," one officer said, flipping through my binder of evidence. "That's a different level of crime than an HOA dispute." I handed over copies of everything. The lab results, security footage, signed statements, and property records showing Karen's company had accessed water lines without permits. "I'm not the one endangering anyone," I said calmly. "I'm protecting my sister and my community from someone who poisoned us for profit and control." That afternoon, while the police interviewed Karen, I called an emergency neighborhood meeting at the community center. Nearly everyone attended, some still angry about their water being shut off, others newly afraid of what might have been in their own pipes. I stood before my neighbors, no longer afraid. I didn't want to be your water provider. I wanted my sister to be safe. I wanted our HOA to protect us, not hurt us. But when systems fail, sometimes you have to build new ones. I projected my plan on the wall. A community water trust with elected oversight, transparent testing protocols, and strict conflict of interest rules. "I'm transferring ownership to this trust," I explained. "Every household gets 1 vote. No one person will have this kind of power again, including me." The vote was unanimous. Even Karen's closest allies raised their hands in support, their thirst for clean water stronger than their loyalty to her. As the meeting ended, Emma tugged my sleeve. Through the window, we could see police cars parked outside the Reynolds house. Officers were leading Tom away in handcuffs while Karen screamed at a news camera. "They found the chemicals in their garage," someone whispered, and records of other neighborhoods where they pulled the same scheme. The next week passed in a blur of lawyers, reporters and water engineers ensuring our supply was safe again. Emma moved back into her house, though she still came over for dinner every night. Her strength returned a little more each day. When the doorbell rang that Friday evening, I was surprised to find Mr. Peterson, the oldest resident in our neighborhood, standing there with a stack of papers. "Been doing some digging," he said, shuffling into my living room without waiting for an invitation. "Found something you should see." The papers revealed that 20 years ago, when our subdivision was built, the developer had designated a portion of HOA fees for community water infrastructure maintenance. Karen had been diverting those funds into her construction company for repairs that never happened. "That money belongs to everyone," Mr. Peterson explained. "With what's left in the account and what we can recover from Karen, there's enough to install filtration systems in every house." On Sunday, neighbors gathered on Emma's lawn to help replant her garden that had died during her hospital stay. Among the flowers, she placed a row of garden gnomes, one for each person who had signed a statement against Karen, a symbol of our weird, imperfect community finding its way back to solid ground. Last night, as we celebrated Emma's full recovery with a backyard barbecue, news came that Karen and Tom had both been indicted on multiple charges. water contamination, fraud, embezzlement, and attempted manslaughter. I look out my window now at our changed neighborhood. Water flows freely again. Children play in sprinklers without fear. Emma is teaching a community class on water safety and environmental rights. The for sale sign in front of Karen's house reminds me how quickly power can shift. I keep the original water rights documents in my safe, not because I plan to use them, but as a reminder of what happens when good people do nothing and what's possible when one person finally does something. What would you do if the system meant to protect you became the very thing threatening your life? Sometimes the only way forward is to change the rules of the game entirely.